Shabbat Shalom. So, because it's Chanukah, we had Hallel, and then we had the blessing for the new month, so we're like 10, 15 minutes later than we should be. So I could I could take some content out of my sermon, but I grew up, the first 17 years of my life in the New York area, so I'll just speak twice as fast. With an accent. I don't have an accent, okay? So here's a question. Why is Hanukkah 8 days? Right? Why is Hanukkah 8 days? Yeah.
Because the menorah light lasted 8 days.
It lasted 8 days, right? I mean, that's what we all know. It was Drasha. I would like to posit that on that basis, it should only be 7 days, because the first day was not a miracle, right? I mean, they knew there was enough oil, right? So day 1 was not a miracle. Only days 2 through 8 were a miracle. Yeah, Charlotte.
I was in a women's league seminar or Hanukkah thing a couple weeks ago, and they said it was because it was 8 days because it was a Sukkot festival.
Right, so there is definitely that theory that actually since Sukkot, when the temple stood, Sukkot was the most important holiday, so that they wanted to have like a delayed Sukkot, right, when they could. And that's actually supported by something. So there's a debate in the Talmud about how we light the candles, all right, where Shammai says we should light 8 candles on the first night and then decrease by 1 each day. Okay, and Shammai's argument is exactly because that's the way they did the sacrifices on Sukkot. They did one sacrifice fewer each day. Okay, so they started the first day of Sukkot had 8 and down to 1 on Shmini Atzeret. Right now, so if Shammai says that, obviously he's got Sukkot in his mind, right? The other logical argument would be that there was less oil each day, right? So, because there's less oil each day, so fewer candles each day. And that's what Shammai says, but Hillel says, no, we start with 1 and then go up, right? The Ma'alim B'Kodesh Ve'ed Moridim, that we want to ascend in holiness, not descend, right? In other words, we want always more light in the world, not less, all right? And I still say you could make the argument that day 1 was not a miracle, but Rabbi David Wolpe says the miracle was human hope. They went ahead and they lit the menorah anyway, believing that what they had started would continue, right? I mean, in other words, the first step of a journey is the most miraculous one, right? That you have the faith that you can continue, right? But the Talmud in this discussion of Hanukkah begins with the following question. My Hanukkah is Aramaic for what is Hanukkah? And you say, hey, you're the sages of the Talmud, you should know, right? Why are you asking what is Hanukkah? but there is an ambivalence about Hanukkah because the Hasmoneans, who started out as liberators, themselves became tyrants. And also, after the Bar Kokhba rebellion of 130 of the Common Era, and that's really when we were kicked out from our land, not so much in 70, right? They wanted to minimize the idea of military resistance to Rome, right? And that's why they chose this Haftarah, which, as I pointed out in the introduction, says, not by might, not by power, but by my spirit. In other words, the sages do not want us to celebrate Hanukkah and get the idea in our heads, let's have another revolt against Rome. Didn't work out too well. First revolt 1 and then revolt 2. Let's not have a revolt 3. So there is definitely a de-emphasis, and even if you look at Al-Hanisim, the prayer that we insert in the Amidah, and if you forgot it during Shacharit, or you read the Hebrew when you don't understand it, look at the English, because we're going to say it again in Musaf if I ever finish my sermon. And it talks about the victory over the Seleucid Empire, but who won that victory in the prayer? Not the Maccabees. God, right? God won that victory. Again, don't get the idea of taking your own initiative, right? But that's not, if we had taken that message to heart, right? Because remember, there are ultra-Orthodox Jews who were from the very beginning against Zionism and are against Israel. Why? Because the Jews did precisely what the sages said they shouldn't do, right? 140 years ago or so, we said, not we, I mean, but our ancestors, the Muslims, said, we're not waiting around any longer for God to redeem us. We're going to do it ourselves, right? And that's why, as I said last night, in Israel, Hanukkah is Chag HaMaccabim, right? The holiday of the Maccabees, and that's why still, I mean, when they started Jewish sports clubs, they were called Maccabee, right? There's a worldwide Jewish Olympics called the Maccabiah game. But there's also in many different countries, including in the United States, right? So that the Washington JCC and I don't know, the Columbus and whatever, but JCCs from all over the country will gather somewhere in the United States and have a athletic competition. It's also called the Maccabi Games, right? And usually the best basketball team in Israel, not every year, but generally, is Maccabi Tel Aviv, right? And the most popular, horrible, terrible beer in Israel is also Maccabi beer, right? Because they want to celebrate the Maccabi, right? But again, as I said last night, in America, it's the holiday of religious freedom, right? Which would have been a great surprise to the Hellenistic Jews that the Maccabees massacred, right? Just like the fact that Thanksgiving is a holiday of religious freedom would have been a great surprise to all the non-Puritans that the Pilgrims sent into exile or worse as well, right? But, so in Israel, Hanukkah is Chag HaMaccabim. Unfortunately, in America, for a lot, it's Jewish Christmas, right? And I mean, I am particularly happy when Hanukkah falls nowhere near Christmas, right? Christmas is great if you're a Christian, and Hanukkah is great if you're a Jew. And this year, all Christmas, there's no such thing. They are different holidays and I recognize that if you are an interfaith household or even a household with two Jews, but one of them grew up a Christian, right? There are relatives, and I understand that. I absolutely understand that. And when Kelly's Aunt Norma was still alive and we would go to her house on Christmas, and I loved it because every year Aunt Norma would read Kelly the Riot Act that she should be nicer to me, right? So I really miss Aunt Norma, and it was great, but it was obvious that that was their holiday, right? And we were there as guests, right? But each holiday has its own integrity, right? And at the same time, I also think that we have to remember that Judaism historically has an ambivalent attitude towards military might, right? It's often a necessity. But it's not something to be relied upon ultimately, because there's always somebody stronger than you, right? And, my friends in Israel who are mostly not supporters of the current government and are very cynical about the current government, and every time there's more rockets that fall on Israel, they say, Od Yom Shel Nitzachon Muchlat, right? Another day of total victory, right? Because the current, we can't have any agreement until we achieve total victory. There is no such thing as total victory, right? There is only compromise. And that means nobody gets everything that they want. Nobody gets everything that they want, and everything that we want will not be achieved by military means. The Jewish attitude, it's ambivalent. It is sometimes necessary, but it is not something to be valorized, and thus I think the ambivalence around Hanukkah, the ambivalence around the Maccabees in our traditional liturgy is really well placed. Shabbat Shalom. And we continue with the Kaddish before Musaf and the Musaf service, beginning on page 155 of 428. And then we'll say the first two pages of the Musaf Amidah.